Your soulmate is about to confess who they really are. I've been living a lie. My beloved child. Your soulmate is standing on the edge of a confession they never believed they would have the courage to make. And when those words finally leave their mouth, "I've been living a lie," you may realize that the person you thought you understood has been carrying a hidden truth for far longer than you imagined. But here is what makes this moment so unsettling. They are not preparing to confess because they suddenly stopped caring about the consequences. They are preparing to confess because hiding it from you has become more painful than whatever might happen after you know. Something changed recently. A conversation. A memory. Maybe even one quiet moment when they looked at your name and realized they could no longer continue pretending. And now, every time they try to act normal, the truth rises closer to the surface. Don't skip, because the lie itself may not be what shocks you most. The reason they created it could change the way you understand everything between you. For a long time, your soulmate convinced themselves that keeping this hidden was somehow protecting you. They built a version of themselves that felt safer to reveal, the composed version, the confident version, the person who seemed certain about what they wanted. But behind that carefully controlled image was someone terrified that if you discovered who they really were beneath it, your feelings would change. That fear became a wall. Every time you came emotionally closer, they almost told you. Then they stopped. Every time you sensed something was missing from their story, they found another way to avoid the question. Yet recently, something unexpected happened. They realized you had already begun seeing through them. Maybe it was the way you noticed their silence. Maybe you asked one innocent question that landed far deeper than you knew. Whatever happened, it frightened them because for one brief second, they felt exposed. And instead of running from that feeling this time, they started wondering whether being exposed might actually be the only way to finally become free. That is why their next move matters. They have been mentally rehearsing this confession, imagining your face when you hear it and wondering whether there will be silence afterward. They may begin with something small, almost harmless, because saying the entire truth at once feels impossible. But underneath those first few words is something much larger. Stay till the end, because there is another layer they have not even admitted to themselves yet. Their lie was never only about hiding who they were. It was also connected to what they believed they had to become in order to deserve you. And once you understand that, certain confusing moments from the past may suddenly make sense, the distance, the hesitation, the times they seemed ready to speak and then pulled away. But now that pattern is breaking. Your soulmate has reached a point where pretending could cost them something they value more than their secret, the possibility of being truly known by you. And there is one specific truth they are terrified to say aloud, because once they confess it, neither of you will be able to look at this connection the same way again. The truth they are terrified to say aloud begins with a sentence they have swallowed countless times: "You never really knew the whole me." And that admission carries more weight than it seems. Your soulmate has allowed you to see pieces of their real heart. The tenderness, the fear, the moments when their guard accidentally disappeared, but they always pulled back before you could see everything. There is a reason. Somewhere along the way, they became convinced that the person they truly were would not be enough. So they learned to perform strength when they felt uncertain, indifference when they cared deeply, and distance when what they actually wanted was closeness. But now that carefully maintained version of themselves is becoming impossible to sustain. Something huge is waiting for you, because the confession they are preparing is not simply, "I lied." It is closer to, "I became someone else because I was afraid of what you would think of the real me." And here is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The person they were trying to convince was not only you. It was themselves. For so long, your soulmate repeated the same private story. They did not need anyone, they were perfectly fine keeping their emotions controlled, and whatever existed between you could be ignored if necessary. But one quiet moment shattered that story. They imagined you eventually believing their distance. They imagined you accepting that they did not care and finally turning away. Instead of feeling relieved, they felt something they were completely unprepared for. A sharp realization that losing you because of a false version of themselves would hurt far more than being rejected for the truth. That was the moment the lie stopped feeling protective. It started feeling like a trap. Don't skip, because what happened after that realization pushed them even closer to confessing. They began going back through memories they had tried not to examine too closely. Words you said. Questions you asked. Moments when you gave them an opportunity to be honest and they chose silence instead. One memory keeps returning stronger than the others, because your soulmate now realizes you may have already sensed the truth in that moment. You noticed something in their expression, their voice, or the sudden way they withdrew. They thought they had hidden it successfully, but now they are no longer certain. And that possibility changes everything. Because if you already saw behind the mask and still cared, then perhaps the rejection they have feared exists mostly inside their own mind. That thought has given them courage, but it has also created a new fear. They know that once they begin confessing, they cannot carefully choose which truths you receive and which ones remain hidden. One revelation will lead directly to another. And the second truth, the one buried underneath, "I've been living a lie," is far more personal than the first. That second truth is the one your soulmate has been avoiding even in their own private thoughts. Their feelings for you became real much earlier than they ever admitted. While they were acting uncertain, distant, or strangely unaffected, something completely different was happening underneath. They were becoming emotionally attached, and that terrified them. The stronger the connection felt, the harder they worked to make it appear ordinary. They told themselves it was temporary. They tried to explain away the way your words stayed in their mind long after conversations ended. But eventually, one uncomfortable realization became impossible to ignore: they were not hiding because they felt nothing. They were hiding because they felt too much. And suddenly, "I've been living a lie" carries another meaning. The person who seemed unsure about you may have been fighting feelings they were afraid to acknowledge. But there is still one question they cannot answer easily. Why were those feelings frightening enough to make them hide who they really were? The answer reaches deeper than simple fear of rejection. Your soulmate has been carrying an old belief that being completely known gives another person the power to leave. So whenever someone gets close enough to see behind the surface, their instinct is to control what that person sees. With you, however, that strategy started failing. You noticed details they never intentionally revealed. You could sense when their mood changed. Sometimes you understood the meaning behind their silence before they found words for it themselves. That made this connection feel different, almost dangerously honest. And then came the moment they still replay in their mind. You showed them kindness when they expected judgment. It may have seemed insignificant to you, but to them it created a crack in everything they believed. For the first time, they wondered whether revealing their true self might not end in abandonment. Stay till the end, because that small realization is exactly what pushed them toward a decision they had been postponing. Now they are thinking less about whether they should confess and more about how they will begin. They have imagined dozens of versions. In one, they tell you calmly. In another, emotion takes over before they can explain themselves properly. But every version reaches the same point. They have to admit that some of their past behavior was deliberately misleading. Not because they wanted to manipulate your heart, but because they were desperately trying to keep their own heart hidden. And there is one particular moment they know they must explain, a moment when they made you believe almost the exact opposite of what they were actually feeling. That memory carries guilt because they know it may have caused you to question the connection itself. They wish they could go back and choose honesty. They cannot. All they can do now is tell you what was really happening behind that moment. And when they finally explain it, you may discover that the coldest thing they ever did was actually hiding the strongest feeling they had for you. That cold moment has been haunting them because they remember exactly what they wanted to say. And exactly what they said instead. When you needed clarity, they gave you uncertainty. When part of you was waiting for reassurance, they acted as though nothing important was happening between you. But beneath that controlled response, your soulmate was fighting the urge to tell you everything. They wanted to admit that you mattered more than they had planned, that your presence had already changed something inside them, and that the possibility of losing you frightened them. Instead, fear won. They chose the safer words, the safer expression, the safer distance. Then they watched the energy between you change. That was when they understood the real cost of their lie. They had protected themselves for one moment, but they may have made you believe something that was never true, that you cared more than they did. And they have regretted allowing you to believe that ever since. What you could not see afterward was the private aftermath. Your soulmate replayed that interaction repeatedly, imagining different words, different choices, a different ending. They wondered whether you noticed the hesitation before they pulled away. They wondered whether you heard the emotion they were trying to hide beneath their voice. Most of all, they wondered whether they had pushed you too far. That question became impossible to ignore when they sensed something different in you. Perhaps you became quieter. Perhaps you stopped reaching in the same way. Perhaps your energy simply felt less available than before. Whatever they noticed, it frightened them because suddenly the possibility of losing you was no longer imaginary. Don't skip. This is where their carefully constructed identity began collapsing. For the first time, they were forced to choose between maintaining the person they had pretended to be and risking everything by showing you the person underneath. And they are leaning toward the risk. Not because their fear disappeared, but because something stronger finally appeared beside it: regret. They do not want another moment where the truth is sitting behind their teeth while a lie comes out instead. So they have begun forming the words they once thought they would never say: what I showed you wasn't the whole truth. What I told you about how I felt wasn't the whole truth either. But even that is only the doorway. There is another admission behind it, and this one could explain why they created the false version of themselves in the first place. It connects to something from before you entered their life, something that taught them to associate vulnerability with loss and honesty with disappointment. They thought they had buried that chapter permanently. Now they realize it has been quietly influencing every choice they made with you. And before they can finally tell you who they really are, they must confess what happened that made them so afraid to be that person. What happened before you entered their life taught them a painful lesson: never let another person see how much power they have over your heart. At some point, your soulmate trusted someone or trusted a situation enough to become completely open, only to discover that vulnerability did not guarantee safety. The disappointment stayed with them longer than anyone realized. They stopped showing people the deepest parts of themselves and created rules instead: stay composed, never need too much, never reveal everything first. Those rules eventually became so natural that even your soulmate forgot they were following them. Then you appeared, and suddenly those defenses stopped working. You made them want to speak when their instincts told them to remain silent. You made them feel something they had trained themselves not to depend on: emotional safety. But that created a terrifying contradiction. The more comfortable they felt with you, the more frightened they became that history could repeat itself. So they did what fear had taught them to do. They hid. But something has changed now. And it happened because your soulmate finally recognized a pattern they could no longer deny. Every time they protected themselves by pulling away, they did not feel safer afterward. They felt emptier. Every time they pretended not to care, they secretly hoped you would somehow understand that the opposite was true. And every time you gave them space, they wondered whether that space might become permanent. Eventually, one question began following them everywhere: what if I lose this person because I was too afraid to be honest? That question hit harder than anything from their past. Stay till the end, because this is where their confession becomes more than an explanation. They are beginning to understand that telling you the truth means taking responsibility for the confusion they created. They cannot simply say they were scared and expect everything to disappear. They know they must acknowledge what their silence may have done to you, and that realization is changing the words they plan to say. They no longer want to approach you with excuses. They want to approach you with the truth, even if the truth makes them look vulnerable. They want to admit, I made you question something I already knew inside myself. And that sentence is frightening because it leads directly to the admission they have avoided longest. Your soulmate knew their connection with you mattered. They knew their feelings were deeper than they showed. Yet there was another reason they kept resisting, one they have barely allowed themselves to examine until now. It was not only fear that you might reject the real them. Part of them feared that you might accept them completely, because then they would have no reason left to hide. No mask. No carefully controlled distance. No escape from the possibility of genuine closeness. And recently, they imagined what it would feel like to finally stand before you without any of those defenses. What they felt surprised them. It was not panic. It was relief. But immediately after that relief came one final secret. Something they know they must reveal before they can honestly say, now you know who I really am. That final secret is not about another person or some dramatic hidden life. It is about the identity your soulmate has been protecting for years. Deep down, they have spent so much time trying to appear independent, unaffected, and emotionally untouchable that they began confusing the mask with their real personality. But you awakened a side of them they thought had disappeared. The person who wants to trust deeply, speak openly, and stop measuring every emotion before showing it. That realization shook them. Because suddenly they had to confront an uncomfortable possibility: maybe the strongest version of themselves was never the one who needed nobody. Maybe strength was being honest enough to admit, "You matter to me, and that scares me." They have rehearsed those words in silence. Each time, another layer of the old identity falls away. And now they are beginning to understand exactly what "I've been living a lie" truly means. The lie was believing they had to become emotionally unreachable in order to remain safe. The lie was pretending their heart could simply switch off whenever feelings became inconvenient. And perhaps the biggest lie was convincing themselves that walking away from something meaningful would hurt less than risking vulnerability. Your soulmate can see the damage in that thinking now. They remember the moments when they almost reached for you but stopped. They remember messages they considered sending, conversations they wanted to continue, and truths they nearly revealed before fear changed their mind. But there is one memory that keeps returning. In that moment, they saw something in you they were not expecting. You were no longer waiting for them to become ready. You were beginning to protect your own heart. That realization struck them harder than any imagined rejection. Don't skip, because it forced them to understand something urgent: the time for hiding may be running out. Now the confession feels closer than ever. Your soulmate knows they cannot control your response, and for once, they are beginning to accept that. Their responsibility is not to guarantee the ending. Their responsibility is to stop manipulating the beginning by hiding the truth. So when they finally speak, expect the first words to sound almost uncertain. They may pause. They may struggle to explain why it took so long. But underneath that nervousness will be a decision they have never made before: to let you see everything without immediately retreating. And there is one sentence they keep returning to, because it contains the truth beneath every other truth: "I was afraid you would see the real me and leave, but pretending not to care was making me lose you anyway." Yet even after saying that, one question remains unanswered. What exactly does the real version of your soulmate want from you now? They finally know the answer, and admitting it will be the most vulnerable part of the entire confession. And what the real version of your soulmate wants now is something they once believed they could never ask for: a genuine chance to be known without hiding behind fear. They are not looking for instant forgiveness or some perfect response. They know honesty cannot erase every confusing moment that came before it. What they want is the opportunity to finally speak without calculating every word, pretending their feelings are smaller than they are, or disappearing emotionally whenever the connection becomes intense. For the first time, they are imagining telling you, "I don't want to keep running from what this means to me." But there is something important behind those words. Your soulmate has realized that wanting you in their life means accepting uncertainty. They cannot control what you decide after hearing everything. They can only give you what they should have given you from the beginning: the truth. And strangely, accepting that has made them feel more courageous than all the pretending ever did. Yet before they can reach that moment, they are facing one last battle with themselves. Their old instincts are still whispering that silence would be easier. They could keep things exactly as they are, avoid the uncomfortable conversation, and never risk hearing an answer they fear. But another voice is stronger now. It reminds them of every opportunity they already low.